Well, the dream of Silicon Valley, where young tech gurus are feted and make their fortunes, has taken a battering in recent times. Privacy and hacking scandals, which rocked Facebook, and the revolt inside Google over doing business with China, have put the big techs under fresh scrutiny. Now a new book titled Live, Work, 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 Die paints a grim picture of an industry marred by greed, vacuous buzzwords and unsavoury politics. Its author, Pein, is an investigative reporter who immersed himself in the world of Silicon Valley. He says it's a lot less glamorous than most imagine.
Well, contrary to the sort of popular fantasy, many people who are employed, even as well-paying engineers for Silicon Valley companies, are pretty unhappy workers, considering the hours and unreasonable expectations of their employers. The work hard, play hard culture that has been celebrated in movies like The Social Network looks actually much less glamorous for most tech industry workers, to say nothing of the people who are subjected to the gig economy that the last wave of Silicon Valley startups unleashed on the world, which, according to my reporting, is essentially a mechanism for dismantling labor protections that have been built up over the last 40 years in the interests of these companies and their investors.
Yeah, and you talk about it almost as a conspiracy to undermine workers and their rights as the rich just get richer.
I would cast it as a confluence of ideology and pecuniary interest. Simply put, these corporations have a extreme ideological libertarian view of their role as entities in the economy. They believe that unrestrained capitalism, that complete freedom from regulation for these companies to conduct all manner of disruption, as they put it, but really can be catastrophic innovations when allowed to be distributed through the world without any restraint. We see the effects not only in environmental catastrophe. Many of the materials used in Silicon Valley's gadgets have a long afterlife. I do report on a somewhat disturbing I suppose, undercurrent in this extreme capitalist, ideology that is more akin to the sort of extreme right or alt-right movements we've seen springing up around the world. This is not to say that tech isn't benefiting a number of people. For starters, it's benefiting a class of well-compensated engineers and marketing people and business staff that work directly for the company, for these tech companies. And part of what I write about is how their presence and their tastes have changed the culture of cities with large tech sectors. So it's not all bleak. There are some smaller winners in this pie. But for most people, I myself was a newspaper journalist, an industry that has been devastated by Silicon Valley. And having worked for a number of more tech-oriented media companies, I have to say the standards of journalism are not what they were under the old economic mode. And I think many people can relate to that. I mean, look around. The way that people relate to each other has changed. It's become a screen-dominant interaction in almost every aspect of society. So you have a number of discrete activities that people used to enjoy replaced with digital replications, which are in many ways inferior. So I hope we have a conversation about the ways that tech has impacted our life in that way as well. Moreover, the economic issue is really important because now that many things are readily available, we have to look at how data is used and controlled, who has access to it, under what terms.
Disturbingly, too, is the kind of control these big tech companies are having over the narrative of our lives, more so than probably we ever imagined.
Well, look, no one knows what causes a story, say a news story or any piece of information, to appear on your personal Facebook or Twitter or Instagram account ahead of another one. The mechanisms that these companies use to present and to gather and use information are known only to themselves. And that's something, if you were, again, to look at historical parallels, if you were to look at an industry that had brought about world-changing technology and disseminated it everywhere for its own profit advantage before anyone could assess the side effects. These companies need to be more transparent. There needs to be regulation. We're talking essentially about private global spy agencies is one way to think about the way a company like Google or Facebook works.
And of course, we've seen a number of employees from Google actually resign over its plans to deal with China, really compromising their integrity. What ability do they really have to make any difference, have any power to change things?
Well, I think that the story you chose to mention is a very significant one because there is plenty of avenue for opposition, both from government action and from action among their own workers and users. So old-fashioned tools like workers advocating for themselves, as was the case at Google, where workers got wind of some new avenues of business that the company was pursuing that they felt violated what they understood as the company's moral obligations, to boycotts such as have taken place to varying degrees of effectiveness with social media platforms at various times. So these companies do respond to pressure. And where governments have demanded answers from these companies at risk of losing their profits, the companies have responded. Granted, they often respond with a lobbying blitz that can undo any public opposition or opposition from the public sector, I should say. That said, that's not the end of the story. There's a backlash against Silicon Valley that grows every day.
Corey, a great conversation to have started. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.